Okay, big topic focusing on the opening weekend of the Premier League season. I'm going to ask you this very difficult question, maybe after one round of games, but is the Premier League's top four set in stone already? And hear me out here. It was such a big weekend for some of the big boys. So many impressive performances, I thought, from some of the big clubs, the star names, lots of great goals. Andy Edwards, I'm going to come to you first. Do you think that question is valid early in the season, or is it maybe slightly too early to make these big picture predictions?
No, I think it's always fun to discuss, and we're going to discuss it all season. When we say the title race or the four horses or the big four, we're going to be talking about these four teams, I think, probably for the majority, if not the entirety of the whole season. So it is going to be fun to kind of track them along as they're going through this path. There were really good performances from a couple of them over the weekend, or three of them, really, I would say. Liverpool, Manchester United, and Chelsea looked very, very comfortable. They played much lesser opposition than Manchester City did. And so I think you would expect that a little bit from those three sides, but they look to be probably of anybody in the league, the most in midseason form of anyone. And that was very impressive, the way that they just kind of approached those games methodically. They had a very clear game plan. They worked hard in ways with Manchester United that maybe wasn't always the case in seasons past. There seems to be a little bit of bite to that Manchester United team. And I think that's what's been missing these last few years, or at least since Sir Alex Ferguson left, that there's just not been that belief and that spirit at the club. And it seems to be growing a little bit. Maybe it's some of the new transfers coming in with Rafael Varane and Jadon Sancho coming into the team. Maybe it's just the natural progression of what the squad is under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And so maybe this is the time where it all comes together and culminates in a real title challenge for Manchester United. The only team you could have a question about, I think, would be Manchester City. And I will say, and I think I said this last week, I think Tottenham will be closer to the top four than anybody else. And I think that was more of a matter of Tottenham being really, really, really well prepared by Nuno, having an excellent game plan to deal with Manchester City, and Manchester City starting the game without Kevin De Bruyne. I think he solves a lot of what their issues were in that game. And it's not just because he's exceptional, but it was the press in the midfield. Dele Alli was a terror defensively with that press. He has been given a new lease on life, but it's not going to work quite the same if De Bruyne is there on the field. He doesn't need the time that everybody else needs. So no worries yet for Manchester City, but I do think it's a big sign for Tottenham that they are maybe the four and a half. They're the 4.5 horse in that race. That if they start the season well, I think they could push themselves into it.
Wow, that's a big statement, but I totally agree with you. I spoke to Nuno Espirito Santo after the game about some of the young players. Japhet Tanganga was excellent, lockdown Sterling and others, and Grealish as well, gave him a tough time. And then Oliver Skipp in midfield, who we talked about giving that solid base as well. So he was really big on bringing through the academy players and having a plan. And Tottenham were great on the counter, did it time and time again. It was almost like watching Wolves at times under Nuno Espirito Santo, the way they set up. So you do wonder how Harry Kane, we're going to talk about him later, how he would maybe slot into that counter-attacking system, perhaps may not quite suit him with some of these other strikers that Tottenham have. So maybe there is life after Harry Kane for Spurs. We'll wait and see. But Nick, do you agree with that in terms of the top four? Is it set in stone? We were talking about City, United, Chelsea, and Liverpool, and then Tottenham are looking good, but obviously Arsenal are not looking good. Do you see anybody else kind of sneaking in there, or that top four, does it really just pick itself right now this season?
Did you see the corner of Andy's mouth kind of almost upturn when we said Arsenal wasn't looking good? I can't say that it's set in stone yet, and it might be in 2 weeks. I just don't know what's going to happen with Harry Kane. I know you guys have stronger leanings on where he's going to go, but I watched Man City, and I thought, first of all, I loved Jack Grealish. I didn't think he was fantastic. I think it was anywhere near where he needs to be, but I just kept thinking about Leroy Sané and Sterling and all the players they've used on the left wing at times to target what they need to do. And I think Jack Grealish is going to get the job done, especially if he gets a center forward to deliver the goods. And I know I'm a broken record on that, but if Harry Kane stays at Tottenham, I'm going to think they can finish top four. I do think he slots into that. And the reason I say that is because I remember so many times last year where we would see Son and Kane maybe alternate a little bit who was the hold-up guy. And when you have two players playing excellent hold-up play, we've seen this in a bunch of different positions now and a bunch of different clubs. So That's where I can't. Now, the question becomes, who do you see dropping out in that instance? And that's incredibly difficult, because what Manchester United did without a bunch of key pieces, and with all due respect to Daniel James, with Daniel James, not Jadon Sancho at right wing, was, whatever you think about Leeds, it kind of blew my mind. And it made me think that maybe I'm right having them above Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, they were missing Cavani, Rashford, Jadon Sancho. Obviously, a few of the England players are only
Varane, yeah.
yeah, Varane, and obviously a lot of the players are just kind of getting up to speed. But United was superb. Fernandes and Pogba, the link-up play there was incredible. Obviously, Pogba having 4 assists, Fernandes scoring a hat trick. It's not a bad outing for those two. But when it comes to City, I was sat next to some of the journalists who cover Man City a lot, and they were just kind of nudging me and saying, "Look, no one's in the box." Time and time again, Grealish or Sterling would kind of streak away and get their head up, and Mahrez as well. And Ferran Torres was in there, and he couldn't. He's not a centre forward. So let's not forget, it's still early. Kyle Walker, John Stones, Kevin De Bruyne, Gabriel Jesus came on. Those players, Foden. Thank you, Nick. Exactly. Those players are still to come in for Manchester City. So let's not write them off. They will still have a very, very good season and be in the top 4. But as Andy said at the start, I think Tottenham have made a very good step forward with or without Harry Kane in terms of the structure of the team, the hunger. I think Nuno, I was chatting to some Tottenham fans before the game in the stands, and they were very excited. They said it's very similar to the Pochettino era, the start of that, when it's a manager coming in who needs to impress, who needs to achieve. This is Nuno's big chance to prove that he's at that top level of managers in the Premier League. And they have that same feeling of intensity in their play with the young players coming in, the way they're set up. I think Tottenham are going to be quite a horrible team to play against this season. But that being said, Andy, what else did we learn across the opening weekend of the season around the Premier League? Any key lessons stand out for you?
I came away pretty impressed with Leicester. I watched them over the weekend and had that one. I know it was a close win over Wolves for them, but they had a different feel. They tried to approach the game in a little bit of a different way. It was a little bit more about the possession and everything, less about just chances on the counterattack. And that's exciting for me to see, a team that's been on the slow and I guess the quick rise initially, and then a slow, steady build ever since then to still keep themselves established as one of the elite teams of the Premier League is, Brendan Rodgers evolving just a little bit. We've kind of come to expect one thing from Brendan Rodgers teams. And so we saw something a little bit different from them over the weekend. And they're kind of a wild card to me as well, in the same vein that Tottenham could push themselves into that top 4 race. Leicester obviously there for the whole of last season and then fell out at the very end. So I just think it's a really good point for the Premier League. It feels like a ton of really good talent, maybe not the elite of the elite talent, but that very second tier that's real close to the first tier has just found its way into the Premier League, and it's spread out well as well. It's not everybody's at Manchester City. It's not everybody's at Manchester United. There are 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 teams that have some really, really, really high quality players in their teams, and they've done good transfer business. They've built good squads. And so I think it just is going to break the race open a little bit more from 1 to 10, forget 1 to 4 only.
That's a great point, because even outside the top 4 battle we're talking about, West Ham, Leicester, Everton, all big wins. Villa have obviously spent well and with the Grealish money coming in. So very exciting up and down the league there. Nick, we haven't spoken about Chelsea or Liverpool that much. They both had 2 impressive wins on the opening weekend. What did you make of those 2 teams?
Mohamed Salah is still very, very good. Very, very good. Liverpool to me is really interesting. And I don't mean to go cult of personality on this, but I'm extremely interested to see. I feel like they'll go, and I'm a Jims and Joes, not X's and O's guy. I think that they'll go as far as Jurgen Klopp goes. I want to know what his vibe is. How is he feeling? What are we getting from him? He almost seemed uneasy or a little bit less talkative than usual in the run up to the game. And I'm not complaining about that. I just wonder, to me, he's a big key. What's his plan with Keita? What's his plan when if Mane is ineffective? How does he rotate? What is going to happen at the back? So there's so many questions there, but I also thought Trent Alexander-Arnold, this is a guy who's going to be refreshed. And there's a lot of players on Liverpool that I think will be hungry to prove that it's not just that it's not over for them. Not that anyone really thinks that. Chelsea really impressed me. And what Thomas Tuchel's going to do, selling Tammy Abraham and bringing in Lukaku and not having Lukaku for this game, and the rotation that he did between midweek and the weekend, I think bears a lot of interesting discussions here. If he can get, your Pulisic's and your Werners to buy into the idea that it doesn't matter what game they play in, whether they're in the Premier League game or a League Cup game or the Champions League, that this rotation is just about winning as much as possible, then I think they'll have a unit that can win just about anything this year.
And what an amazing moment to see Trevor Chalobah. Obviously, that was unbelievable to see him score his first goal on his Premier League debut. Obviously, a player that's been out on loan at a bunch of teams and just broke down and was, so emotional on the pitch. It was great to see that for Chelsea. And for Liverpool, my only question mark around them is in midfield. We know Naby Keita, the Ox, just struggle with injuries. If they can stay fit with Thiago, Fabinho, and Jordan Henderson, that's a great rotation with Champions League and the Premier League. That should hold them in good stead. But it's kind of a big if, right, with those two players, Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain I mentioned. They need to stay fit. But fitness-wise, having Virgil van Dijk back was unbelievable. I think just made the whole team seem a lot calmer, even though he was a bit rusty at times. You could just tell everyone seemed a lot more relaxed for Liverpool with him back there. And that's a huge boost for them, I think, not just on the pitch, but psychologically. If you're looking around and you've got, him back, and it's going to take him a while to get up to speed, but his quality and his class. And I think that's a massive, massive bonus for Liverpool this season. All right, we talked about the positives a lot there, but on the flip side of things, Andy, have we changed our opinion about some teams that maybe struggled in the opening week? You're like, they didn't do as well as we thought they would. Yeah. They might have a bad season.
No, I feel like collectively we had a pretty good feel for what the bad teams in the league were going to look like. Crystal Palace, Chelsea were fantastic. And I'll say, if there's a team that could run away with the title this season, and I know I picked them and it's not because of that, but they would be the one that I think that has a next level to go to, that they could run away with it. So of course, Crystal Palace, that's about the toughest opening day matchup you could have. But they didn't look like a professional team. They certainly didn't look like a Premier League team. The energy that they had, I didn't know what the game plan was at all for Crystal Palace. And I know Patrick Vieira has only come in pretty late. He came in, I believe, after Nuno did at Tottenham even. And so they had a lot of turnover. And he said after the game, we still need a bunch of new players because we just don't have the squad. And so there are a lot of institutional problems at Crystal Palace right now, and institutional problems get you relegated from the Premier League, and institutional problems to the degree that Palace have them get you relegated pretty embarrassingly with a really low points total. So I worry for them. And the other one of the teams that I picked, I guess a bit surprisingly to go down this season, Southampton, they didn't look great against Everton. They started well, they got the early goal, but it felt like the same old Southampton of recent years, that things can go well, one thing can go wrong, and everybody folds. The whole thing falls apart, and what happens. They lose 3-1, after being up a goal almost to halftime. I worry a lot. I really worry a lot for those two teams this season.
Me too. I think that's a very fair assessment of the opening weekend now, teams that struggled. And I want to add Arsenal into the mix because I was at Brentford, saw it firsthand, and almost from the first 3 or 4 minutes of the game, I knew Arsenal were going to lose that game. The way Brentford were high pressing, Ben White and Pablo Mari looked very uneasy on the ball. Obviously, Arteta was trying to tell them and Leno to keep playing out from the back and keep doing it. Callum Chambers had a bit of a nightmare at right back. I thought some of the young guys, Martinelli, obviously Smith Rowe, and then Saka when they came on, and Kieran Tierney as well, played really well. But there's too many players there in the Arsenal team who just have off days too often. And the intensity of Brentford, they couldn't handle it. Again, I don't know whether that's because the likes of Lacazette and Aubameyang were out of the team last minute and it upset the balance and the rhythm, obviously with their illness. But I just feel like Arteta, his demeanor, the way he was acting after the game, he knows they're in a bad situation. And they have brought in a lot of young players. They've got a lot of young players they're giving opportunities to. That's fair enough. That's going to take time. And you just wonder if they've got some hard games coming up with Chelsea this weekend. And, City, I think, after that as well. So they've got a tough start to the season. How long is Arteta going to get? We spoke about that preseason. This project is a long-term project, and I need to let him see it through. And I don't know that's going to happen right now, the way they started the season. I saw a lot of bad things from Arsenal. Nick, finally, quickly to wrap up this section, which team for you needs to do a bit of work in the transfer window between now and the end of it? Because a few teams, is 2 weeks to go until the window shuts. Don't quite know why I looked at my watch there, but I guess it does have a date on it. But there's some teams that need to do some business late in the window, right?
Yeah, besides the obvious ones, the guys who aren't spending anyways, with apologies to Joe Willock, and Newcastle and Burnley have just basically said, I think we'll be fine. And while the rest of us are kind of looking at them, I'm going to point to Arsenal. And the reason I'm going to do that is the questions over Aubameyang. There is something I was going to point out maybe later when we talked about Arsenal-Chelsea, and that's this: for as bad as they were, for their standards, and playing against a newly promoted team, which also adds to the sting, they still had all of the ball. I think they took the most shots in the match week. And Mikel Arteta did say after the game, we got to the right places. We just didn't do anything with it. So Lacazette's going to finish some of that. Aubameyang, I know we might be worried about what his long-term status as a star is, but he's not terrible, right? He's going to find goals. And Thomas didn't play either. So if they're going to buy Odegaard, with all due respect to this strange Emile Smith-Rowe fascination, who's a decent player, Martin Odegaard is a dude. And if you add a player into that position, then all of a sudden they're winning more games. Remember, those three players I mentioned that didn't play are very, very good at football.
That's true. There's a lot of hot takes flying around right now early in the season, just after week one, ourselves included, but it's a lot of fun to do it and see how these teams are shaping up. Over at Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com, we have an article up, 10 things we learned from the opening weekend of the season, wraps up all of our thoughts from all the games we watched closely. And of course, you can head over to PST for the latest analysis, news, and recaps and reaction from all the Premier League games throughout this season.